Here's another one. Jesus said, "You don't believe because you are not my sheep." John chapter 10, for those that are interested in looking it up. Take a drink. So, if Jesus says, "You don't believe because you're not my sheep," doesn't that mean you have to be a sheep in order to believe? How is that not supporting Calvinism? And again, Jesus says, "You don't believe because you're not my sheep." Now, what does that mean? Well, the Calvinist has done a really good job convincing people that sheep means eternally elect, or unconditionally chosen people before the foundation of the world. Jesus says nothing about before the foundation of the world. He says nothing about God's choice of people and those kinds of things in the context of this passage. Nothing like that even remotely in this passage. What Calvinists are doing is they're grabbing from other passages like Ephesians and Romans and other places and taking in that the concept of divine election, God choosing people unconditionally before the foundation of the world, and they're applying it to individual salvation, and then they're reading it back into this text, this narrative of Jesus speaking to predominantly a Jewish, unbelieving Jewish audience who has grown calloused and hardened in their rebellion, and applying their soteriology to this context is what's happening. And so what they hear is, you don't believe because you're not elect. You're not unconditionally chosen before the foundation of the world. That's what a Calvinist hears when they read this text from Jesus. You don't believe because you're not one of my chosen. You're not one of my sheep. And so if you were one of my sheep, my unconditionally elected ones, before the foundation of the world, then you would believe. But because you're not chosen, because I don't really want you, is basically what he's saying, you can't believe in these things because I haven't given you the miracle of whatever it is that gives you regeneration and causes you to believe. And I don't really want you to believe. That's the reason you're not believing. That's the way the Calvinist is understanding of this text, and that's not what Jesus is talking about at all. It's actually, to me, that seems like a nonsensical interpretation of what Jesus is getting at in John chapter 10, given the context of John, the entire book of John. Throughout the entire book of John, you hear Jesus saying over and over again, if you believed in Abraham, you would believe in me because he talked about me. If you believed in what Yahweh taught you, what the fathers taught you, then you would believe in me because I say the same thing the Father says. He spoke of me. I'd only say what the Father says, and if you believed the Father, you would believe me too, because we speak the same thing. That is a common theme throughout the entire book of John, including this very chapter of chapter 10. He even says that very thing later in chapter 10, if you go and read it in its entire context. What's Jesus' point? You don't believe in me, the Son, because you are not a follower of God. That's what a sheep is referring to. A sheep is a follower of God in this context. You would believe in me, the Son, the shepherd that he, the Father, has sent, if you were a follower of the Father. Because if you recognize the Father's voice, you would recognize the Son's voice. Why? Because the Father and the Son have the same voice. We say the exact same things. Just like he said earlier in chapter 5, if you listen to Abraham and Moses, you would believe in me because they spoke about me. The truth of the matter is that if you're a listener and a learner, John chapter 6, verse 45, if you listen and learn from the Father, you would come to the Son. Why? Because the Son speaks the same thing as the Father. Listeners and learners of the Father, sheep, listen and learn from the Son. Why? Because the Son says the same thing the Father says. Doesn't that make much more sense than, oh yeah, you're not believing because I really don't want you to. Yeah, I don't really like you. Oh yeah, I like those people over there for reasons I'm not going to tell you, but I just don't like you. Just arbitrarily, I pick some and not others, and I don't really want you, and that's why you can't believe in me. I'm going to mock you for not believing me because God mocks proud mockers, and he shows favor to the humble, but you have no control over whether you humble yourself or not on Calvinism. Do you see how absurd that really sounds when you think about it, when you back away and you reapproach this text and you go, oh, that's what Jesus was talking about. He was saying, he wasn't saying you're not believing me because I don't want you to. He's saying you're not believing in me because you're not following God. You're not a sheep. You're not a follower of God. If you were a follower of God, you would recognize my voice because I am his shepherd. I'm the one he has sent. I'm his son, and you would believe in me. Sheep recognize the voice of the Father, and therefore you would recognize my voice. That just makes so much more sense, I think, in the context of John chapter 10 and all that he's talking about. And most people, I think, understand that if they're willing to drop their preconceived ideas and notions.